All right, so we're diving into this Naval Ravikant interview, and I got to say, finding this on the Beer Biceps YouTube channel, kind of unexpected, right? Yeah, not exactly where you'd expect deep philosophical discussions, but hey, that's what makes it so interesting. Totally. We're going to be unpacking a lot here: knowledge, happiness, even the meaning of life. So much to cover. What was your first impression, expert speaker? What really jumped out at you?
Honestly, it's how much Naval emphasizes like really understanding things instead of just memorizing facts. He even calls himself like a basic thinker.
Yeah.
But you can tell he digs into the fundamentals of everything.
Yeah.
He talks about loving physics, but hitting a wall with calculus, because he hadn't really mastered it yet. That kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like he's building a solid foundation, brick by brick, instead of just skimming the surface. I know I'm guilty of taking in information without really getting it sometimes.
Yeah, we all do.
Do you think consciously seeking that deeper understanding, is that something you can learn?
Totally, yeah. Naval, he kind of challenges us to question everything, to break those big ideas down into like their core parts. He's not happy just knowing something. He wants to know why it works, how it connects to everything else. It's a process, not just a destination.
Right, right. Okay, so let's tackle one of those big fundamental questions then. The meaning of life. Naval, he says it's both meaningless and infinitely meaningful, all at the same time. How does that work?
It's a paradox, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's brilliant is how he ties the answer to perspective. Like, from our individual point of view, life can feel kind of meaningless, especially when we're just caught up in the day-to-day. But when you zoom out, consider how everything's connected, then suddenly every little moment is full of meaning.
Oh, I see. So it's not about picking one or the other, but seeing how both can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
That's it. Wow, that's pretty profound. It's like those times when I've felt completely insignificant, but also like I'm part of something much bigger.
Exactly.
I guess they can both be true.
Yeah, Naval's encouraging us to embrace that whole experience. It's not about, denying the individual, but also seeing how we fit into the bigger picture.
Okay, that makes sense. And he links this whole perspective thing to happiness too, right? He says thinking about ourselves all the time is like the root of unhappiness.
He's really clear about that. Naval believes real happiness comes from focusing outwards on love, on creativity, on understanding. When we just obsess over our own needs and wants, it keeps us stuck.
Yeah, I can see that. There's that thought experiment he does where he imagines himself dying and then watches what's left behind. What do you make of that?
Powerful stuff. It's like stripping away the ego, the self, and seeing what stays. What's left is often, love, connection, purpose, things that go beyond just our individual lives.
I get it. It reminds me of when you're totally engrossed in something, you lose track of time completely. That flow state, that's kind of what he's talking about, right?
Yeah, that feeling of total absorption. So basically, those flow state activities, those things that pull us out of ourselves, those are key to being fulfilled.
That's a pretty practical takeaway, actually.
It is. It's about finding those things that, really light you up, make you lose yourself in the moment. Could be art, could be nature, could be just having deep conversations, anything that gets you into that flow.
All right, got to ask about Naval's connection to India. He's obviously proud of his heritage, but also doesn't want to be defined by it. Interesting balance.
It is, yeah. He definitely acknowledges how Indian culture and philosophy have shaped him, especially his spiritual side. He mentions reading things like the Bhagavad Gita, the Ashtavakra Gita, but he also says, find your own Jibyu and truth. Don't just follow tradition blindly.
Yeah, I like that. I think anyone who's felt pressure to, be a certain way because of their background can relate to that.
Definitely. He's taking what he finds valuable, integrating it into his own way of seeing things. And you see that independent thinking in how he talks about relationships, too. Like when he challenges that whole happy wife, happy life idea.
Oh, yeah, that caught my attention, too. So he's saying it's about mutual happiness, not one person sacrificing for the other.
Exactly. Authenticity, mutual respect, those are key for him. And remember how he talked about conflict avoidance? If a relationship's always full of drama, he walks away. He wants harmony, compatibility.
That's pretty different from how a lot of people see relationships, especially, the whole romanticizing conflict thing. So he's saying finding the right partner, someone who gets you, that's essential for long-term happiness.
It's about realizing a good relationship needs both people to thrive, not just exist. And, this whole thing about individual growth, but still being connected to something bigger, it seems to come up a lot with Naval.
Yeah, you're right. It's in his approach to knowledge, to happiness, even relationships. Finding that balance between the individual and the universal. And hey, speaking of balance, he also talks about finding that flow state, right?
Right. He describes it as like a meditative state. You're totally absorbed in what you're doing. Like when he said his tweets, they often just come to him fully formed. Like he's tapping into some stream of consciousness.
Wow. So that flow state, that's where his best thinking happens. That's where he's most in tune with himself and the world around him. Makes you wonder how we can, cultivate that in our own lives.
He thinks it's crucial, both for happiness and for, getting things done. It's about finding those things that let you get lost in the moment, tap into that effortless focus, that creativity. And this actually connects back to his advice for you about being more selfish with your podcasting.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask about that. He basically told me to be more selfish with the podcast. It threw me off at first, but now, well, it's starting to make sense.
He's saying, focus on what you find fascinating. Talk to guests you're genuinely excited about, and the audience will follow.
Okay, so it's about trusting my gut and letting my passion guide things. He's not saying ignore the audience completely, right?
No, but he's saying, when you're passionate, it connects with people on a deeper level.
So find that balance between serving the audience and staying true to my own vision.
That's it. And Naval's own success proves that point, right? He didn't build a huge following by trying to please everyone. He did it by being himself, sharing his unique perspective.
It's a good reminder that being authentic, even if it means going against the grain sometimes, that's often the best way to connect and make a real impact.
Absolutely.
And speaking of impact, he also had some interesting things to say about fame. He doesn't seem to be all that drawn to it.
He actually said he'd rather be anonymous. Pretty wild for someone with millions of followers, right?
It really challenges how we usually think about success. It's like he's saying that external validation, it's tempting, but it can distract us from what truly matters.
He's not saying fame is bad exactly, but warning us about the downsides, how it can mess with your priorities, make you chase approval instead of your own truth.
And he admitted to feeling uncomfortable when fans ask for pictures and stuff. It's a reminder that fame comes at a cost.
He's saying find fulfillment in the work itself, in the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, not in chasing external rewards.
It's about inner happiness, living in line with your values, not chasing, fleeting external rewards. And that actually brings us to something interesting about how Naval approaches self-reflection. He doesn't dwell on the past or obsess about the future.
Nope.
He even said he doesn't think about himself that much. Seems counterintuitive, but maybe that's part of how he stays so grounded.
He's not stuck in that loop of self-judgment, comparing himself to others. Instead, he's focused outward, trying to understand the world, pursuing knowledge, having meaningful conversations.
It's like he's found a way to be present in the moment, to appreciate life's beauty and complexity without getting lost in his own ego.
It's a profound insight. By letting go of that self-obsession, we can find more peace, more fulfillment.
Finding that balance again, right? Being a functioning person in the world, but also connected to something bigger.
Exactly. And that connection, for Naval, it often comes through his engagement with spirituality. You might not like the word, but his exploration of Eastern philosophy, that's a recurring theme.
Yeah, he's drawn to the wisdom of those ancient traditions, especially the ones about self-realization, the pursuit of truth.
And he's not just reading about it, he's actively trying to understand it, to test it out through his own experiences.
He even mentioned meeting with spiritual teachers, meditating. But ultimately, he says it's about finding your own path.
Taking inspiration from others, but trusting your own intuition, your own direct experience.
He's not looking for rigid beliefs. He's trying to understand consciousness, the nature of reality.
And it's that openness to exploring those big questions, even the ones without easy answers, that makes him such a fascinating thinker.
He's not afraid to challenge what everyone else thinks, question assumptions, explore the mysteries of life.
And that's a quality we can all cultivate, right?
Absolutely. Embracing the unknown, the paradoxical, the fact that truth is always evolving.
And maybe in that journey of exploration, we might just find a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe.
Wow, that's beautifully put. We've covered so much ground already, but we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to this interview, especially Naval's thoughts on success, money, the role of technology in our lives. We'll dive into all of that in part 2 of our deep dive into the mind of Naval Ravikant.
It's interesting, isn't it, how Naval approaches tech.
Yeah, he's so immersed in that world, but not blindly optimistic about it. There's a real sense of caution there.
He loves how tech can, amplify what humans can do, solve problems.
Right.
But he sees the risks too. Like, remember when he talked about his early days on Twitter? He
Yeah.
used it almost like a public journal, working through his ideas in real time.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting. So he's refining his thinking by putting it out there, seeing how people react. Never thought of Twitter that way.
Yeah, it's pretty unique, and he's not afraid to, poke the bear a little. He even admitted to tweeting provocative stuff just to see who'd bite.
Haha, bold move. But I guess it helps him cut through the noise, find people who are actually engaging with the ideas.
Exactly. He values those peer relationships, the ones that challenge him intellectually. It's not about follower count, it's about quality over quantity.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear someone push back against that whole social media numbers game. Real intellectual growth comes from dialogue, connection, not chasing likes.
And you see that emphasis on genuine connection in his advice for you too, right? To be more selfish with the podcast.
Oh yeah, that keeps coming back to me. Focus on what fascinates you, interview guests you're excited about, and the audience will follow. Still kind of processing that one.
It's about trusting your gut, letting passion drive the creative process, not ignoring the audience, but realizing your enthusiasm. It shows it resonates.
So finding that balance again. Serving the audience, but staying true to my own vision.
Exactly. And look at Naval's own success. He didn't build that following by trying to please everyone. He did it by being authentic, sharing his perspective.
It's powerful, right? Being yourself, even if it means going against the grain, that's often how you connect, make a real impact.
Absolutely. And speaking of impact, his thoughts on legacy and that whole antinatalist movement, that was interesting.
Oh, yeah, that part. Pushing back against not having kids, saying we owe our existence to, a whole line of ancestors who did choose to have kids.
He even said, if you don't have kids, you better find God fast. Bit of a strong statement.
Definitely provocative. But maybe it speaks to that human need for connection, purpose, something that gives life meaning beyond our own lifespan.
He might not be saying everyone needs biological children, but that we need to connect to something bigger than ourselves, something that gives our lives, continuity, purpose.
Family, community, creative work, spirituality. It's like he's saying, find what grounds you.
Right. And that brings us back to his fascination with Eastern philosophy, those concepts of flow state, the self, all that.
Yeah, that flow state, being totally absorbed in an activity, the self fading away, time disappears, you're just in the moment.
He even compared it to being in love. Everything's heightened, you're completely captivated.
And he thinks cultivating those flow state activities, that's key for happiness and productivity. Not escaping reality, but finding things that bring joy, purpose, connection.
It's like unlocking your creative potential, accessing a deeper level of awareness. And this exploration of consciousness, it leads him to those big questions, What happens after death? The nature of reality. He doesn't shy away from them.
Like that thought experiment, imagining his own death, seeing what remains. Letting go of the self, what transcends the ego.
It's a reminder, right? Time is limited. Make the most of it. Pursue what matters. Love, creativity, connection, truth.
Embrace the unknown. Be open to new experiences. Challenge those assumptions we hold about the world.
He's a great example of someone who's not afraid to say, I don't know all the answers. But it's that curiosity, that willingness to grapple with the big questions that's inspiring.
It's a journey, this self-discovery. It takes intellectual rigor and a whole lot of humility.
No dogma, no easy answers. He's looking for deeper understanding, and he's inviting us along for the ride.
It's a journey that could lead us to unexpected places,
Yeah.
Challenge our beliefs, make us face our limitations.
But it's worth it. In that pursuit of truth, connection, meaning, that's where we often find the most fulfillment. I think that's the heart of what Naval is trying to say.
You put it perfectly. But we've only scratched the surface, haven't we? There's still so much more to unpack, especially his views on wealth, success, the future of tech.
Lots to dig into.
All right, I'm hooked. Let's delve into all of that in part 3 of our deep dive into the mind of Naval Ravikant. All right, so we've covered a ton of ground, but there's one big piece we haven't really touched on. Money. It's something a lot of people have strong opinions about, and Naval, well, he definitely has his own perspective.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from the topic, does he? Even though he knows, all the baggage that comes with it, especially these days. But he doesn't, demonize it either.
You're right. It's not good or evil. It's more like tool.
Exactly. He talks about wealth being a form of leverage, something you can use to make positive change or, to make things worse. It depends on what you do with it, your intentions.
He also says it shouldn't be the ultimate goal, right? It's a means to an end, not the end itself.
Definitely. He's more interested in the process of building wealth, creating businesses, solving problems, not just piling up money. He even compares it to, like, playing a game. Once you've won, it's time to move on to something more meaningful.
I like that analogy. It's about the challenge, the growth, not the trophy at the end. And speaking of growth, he talks about success often coming in waves, right? Like a few key decisions or achievements can have a huge impact on your whole life trajectory.
Yeah. That compound interest analogy, right? Early gains can lead to exponential growth over time. It's a good reminder that even small choices, the ones that seem insignificant at the time, can have a ripple effect. It's not about obsessing over every single decision, but, just being mindful of the choices we make and how they might compound over time.
Being intentional,
Yeah.
recognizing that those small steps in the right direction can lead to big results down the line. That's actually pretty encouraging. And that long-term thinking kind of connects to how he sees technology too, doesn't it? Excited about the possibilities, but also cautious about the downsides.
Totally. He's got that balance, right? He sees how tech can, like, enhance what we can do as humans, solve big problems, but he also worries about, how it can be used to manipulate and control, especially if it gets into the wrong hands.
Yeah, and he talked about social media, the media in general, creating this distorted view of reality, leading to anxiety, division.
He's not anti-technology, not at all. But he wants us to be aware of how it's shaping us, to use it consciously, critically, not letting it use us, basically. And that means, developing those critical thinking skills he talked about, being able to spot the truth in a world that's full of, well, misinformation and manipulation.
Becoming more discerning consumers of information, taking responsibility for what we let into our minds.
Exactly. Being selective, questioning everything, not getting swayed by, emotional appeals or tricks, and remembering we always have a choice in how we engage with technology. We don't have to just be passive. We can be active, shaping how it's used, making sure it's used for good.
And that emphasis on personal agency, taking ownership of our choices and actions, it feels like a theme with Naval, doesn't it? He's a tech investor, a deep thinker, but he's also big on self-reliance, taking responsibility.
Totally. He doesn't ignore systemic issues our luck, but he stresses focusing on what we can control. Our thoughts, our actions, how we respond to challenges. It's about realizing we have the power to create our own lives no matter what our circumstances are.
Empowering and challenging at the same time. We're not just passengers, We're active participants in creating the future. And that's what makes Naval so compelling, I think. He's not just talking about these ideas, he's living them, taking risks, challenging norms, constantly pushing himself to grow.
And that's inspiring, right? It reminds us that learning and growing is a lifelong journey. It takes curiosity, a willingness to, question everything, even our own beliefs.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've explored so much knowledge, happiness, relationships, spirituality, money, technology. Naval's clearly a complex guy, someone who's not afraid to tackle the big questions.
And what strikes me is how open he is about his own journey, his willingness to be vulnerable, to say, hey, I don't have all the answers. He's a seeker, always learning, and he's inviting us along for the ride.
Well said. Any final thoughts for our listeners as we wrap up this deep dive?
I think Naval would say, be more curious, think for yourself, create your own path to happiness, to fulfillment. Embrace the whole human experience, the good A and D, the bad. It's all part of the adventure of being alive.
Beautifully put. And if you want to hear more from Naval himself, check out the full interview on the Beer Biceps YouTube channel. It's definitely worth a watch. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.